Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, October 11th, and this is the. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Let's turn my speaker on. Today is Wednesday, October 11th. This is the Town Council Finance Committee meeting. It's our regular meeting. Call this meeting to order and note that we have a full slate present. Councilor Shoup and Hamel are joining me today, as well as a number of guests from the fire and EMS departments, which is going to be our primary focus. But before we do that, I want to motion to approve the minutes from our September 13th, 2023 meeting. So everybody had a chance to review those minutes. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion, changes, alterations?
Nope.
All those in favor? Motion passes 3-0. Thank you. And now we get into the meat of our meeting is going to be to take a deep dive into our fire and EMS operations, and hopefully a little bit of a forward look of where they're heading and going. Understand some of the things that might be coming down the pike, both from their perspective and things that the council might want to deal with down the road.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to miss the opportunity, but I wanted to request a possible slight change to the agenda, just a brief statement about, or brief discussion about one other item related to the CEA cap that we discussed. It's not extensive, but I would appreciate the chance
You want to
to
talk
make
about
a
it?
mention about it. Yeah.
So
If
why
there's
don't-
time permitting?
Why don't we get through this? Yeah. And then I definitely want to cover the option fee, and if time permitting, I'll talk about anything you want. You too.
Let's talk fast. I got lots of them.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so with that, I know we have Chief Kendall in here, Tom, Liam, I don't know if you want to kind of give us a lead in or walk in.
Liam will.
Liam, you're up. Sure.
So I'm appreciative of the committee's willingness to have this session. I think that this is another opportunity to have the committee develop a better understanding of the business that we're in here with an essential service. Obviously, the fire department's a fairly large cost center. And it's somewhat unique in that the environment is really changing and evolving quickly from COVID on. Some of them are unique to Scarborough. Some of them are really rooted in how the industry and business is changing. But we want to give you an opportunity to do a deeper dive outside of the budget season into some of the cost drivers within the department, whether that's staffing, whether that's services, revenues, things like that. So this is an opportunity to, outside that pressure, to develop a better understanding of our fire EMS services.
Chief, I think that's a nod to you now.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to sit in front of you and share some of the information from our department. I'd like to start off, the first slide is, it'll look familiar. It's the overview from the budget season with just a couple additional comments I'd like to make. First of all, I'd like to introduce my team. I have the senior staff of the fire department here, Deputy Chief Kevin Duross, who is my number 2. His main program directives are staffing, HR, staffing, and he takes care of all the compliance with EMS, running the EMS division for us. Next to him, I have Deputy Chief Brennan, who is our Fire Prevention Bureau Deputy Chief, and what he handles is the plans reviews. He does our compliance with Bureau of Labor and works with the state and MMA and things like that for us. But he's very busy with the stuff that's going on in town. As we know, there's a lot of projects in the hopper, and he walks across from town hall to the station on Mondays with a handful of new plans to review, and he spends a lot of time. And I'm very lucky that I have a part-time person, John Hedrick, who works for him that really helps him take off some of the lighter stuff that he has to do and gets that done. We'll talk a little bit about more some of the projects that he's had to deal with recently that really had some real time, a lot of time suck on him. So it was really something that we'll talk about. And then down at the end of the table, last but not least, is Deputy Chief Ian Tenney. He was hired as our professional development training coordinator for the department. The department our size really needed to have some organization on making sure that we were hitting the marks and making sure our people were highly trained and highly ready to do that job. One of the things that a lot of departments really like to get to achieve is have somebody that focuses on that. We used to do training by committee. That sort of has kind of petered out. It hasn't worked as well over the years because of people's time and trying to get stuff done. Having a single source for that, for approving trainings, making sure that he's setting the parameters for the year. Deputy Chief Tenney has been an unbelievable asset to this organization. So very glad to have them. For the overview, we operate with 3 classifications of employees. As you know, from the budget season, we have full-time staff, we have per diems, and we have call firefighters. And that breakdown currently is As you see, we have the 4 full-time command staff here. We have 2 administrative assistants. And we have 36 full-time equivalents, firefighter and EMS. They're dual certified to be able to do both jobs. We're down to 53 per diems, and of those per diems, I would probably say probably 80% of them are still active and still pulling some time with us. And we're down to 34 call members, and you're going to see a slide coming up shortly that will show you that unfortunate decline over the years from the participation of the call companies, the neighborhood firefighters that used to be part of the organization. We're an all hazards fire service organization. We do fire, we do EMS, we are an advanced life support, probably one of the best fire service ALS transport organizations in the state. And some of you may or may not know that Scarborough was one of the first agencies in the state to have a formal rescue program under Dr. Hagis's guidance at the time.
What's ALS stand for?
Advanced life support. So we can operate at the highest level. Our paramedics can diagnose a heart attack and get you from the ER to the cath lab quicker. They have a lot of different advantages to having a paramedic level service. And Scarborough has had paramedics for as long as I can remember.
And where do people go if they have to take advantage of this emergency service? They take them to Maine Med, or it depends on.
We give a choice. They go to Maine Medical Center, Mercy, our Northern Light Mercy, and Biddeford, Southern Maine and Biddeford, based on what their choice is. Sometimes that choice is not given to them based on their condition, traumatic injuries, heart conditions, things like that. We take them directly to Maine Med, where they're going to get the highest level of service.
Thanks.
Next slide. As you know, we operate from the main public safety building. That's our headquarters, or our main station right next to us, and 5 additional neighborhood fire stations. That was a discussion during budget season. I think we talked a little bit about that and the determination between what stations were being staffed at the time, and we'll get a little bit more into that in a couple additional slides. Our fleet consists of 6 pumpers or engines, depending on what you know them as. So the ones that come and take the hoses off and put water on fire. 2 ladder companies, 3 ALS ambulances, 2 of which are staffed. The third one is essentially a spare, but it's running so much that it's really becoming a primary unit, which is something that we'll have to address with staffing in the future. A heavy rescue truck that runs out on most of anything with technical rescue, extrication, a car accident requires the jaws of life, things like that. And then each one of us has a staff vehicle, and we have a few other ancillary vehicles that are used for moving equipment around, snow plowing, and things like that we also operate. And our daily target staffing 24 hours a day is for 15 firefighter EMS providers. That on any given day, that is our goal, to hit 15. And that has changed a little bit from what it used to be. We initially had 18 during the day, and we dropped down to 12 at night. And for me, as the chief coming in, I didn't understand what the methodology was. Our call volume really wasn't much different. It certainly is a little bit slower at night, but you still need, according to the standards, you still need the same amount of firefighters to respond to a structure fire and be available. Specifically at night when our ambulances are out, that takes up to 6 people out of our firefighting cadre. They're not available to do firefighting because they're at the hospital treating a patient that was taken from somewhere. And so there's 6 people that could potentially be out of our numbers for that period of time.
Is there any trend in terms of calls? I mean, for example, the ambulance calls, they happen more typically at night or first thing in the morning or first thing in the week? Is there any trend?
There are certainly some trends, and we can certainly, I know that Deputy Chief DuRoss is mapping some of that stuff out as we're entering this new CAD with the public safety core system. But definitely during the day, one of the biggest drivers of that is our medical facilities, the campuses that is operating during the day. It's not unlike us to go eight times to the main med campus in a day's period to take patients that are either higher acuity that they can handle. So definitely during the day is a busier time. And we also have all the external workers that come into town, travel through the commuters and things like that. So our population increases, which will in turn will increase that call volume. That makeup, just so you're aware, that's 9 full-time staff are assigned to one of 4 shifts. So there's 9 on each shift. We are allowed to drop down to 7 is the minimum staffing for them. So that allows 2 people to use their PTO, their vacation time. And we will drop down to 7 full-time staff, which leaves us making up the rest of the 15 with per diem, which has become more and more complex and difficult to manage with some of the challenges that we'll talk about shortly.
Just for background, what's per diem? I imagine it's per day. That's my bad French, but Can you explain?
It's been called several things since I've been here. It's been called a day firefighter per diem. It's technically a part-time employee who it used to be that didn't really have many benefits, but now even with ACA, there's benefits that for some of those that work a lot of hours with us. There's EPL, the earned paid leave for them. So some of these part-timers are receiving some of those benefits now, but they are technically a part-time provider that works full-time somewhere else and picks up extra shifts on their days off or fills in when they can.
Now, do our staff typically do per diem for other communities and kind of vice versa? Is that?
Not as much as some of the other departments, and I think you'll see why in a coming slide, why they don't, they have an opportunity to fill in some of those shifts here locally when we can't get per diems. They can fill in those shifts, which really, while it does cost us a little bit more because they're full-time and they may be entitled to some overtime pay, it keeps our people who are trained, know the town, know all the policies and procedures in our town, and they're not going off to work somewhere else. So there's a little bit of a benefit there that allows us to have those people.
The title might suggest kind of intermittent kind of call in the morning. Can you show up today? That's really not what we have.
No.
These folks are professional firefighters, highly credentialed, some of whom have been with us 20+ years. They're on a scheduled shift. So they act, very much like our full-time firefighters, but they're a little less predictable, I'll say.
I'll give Deputy Chief Lamoria a lot of credit. When he took over, one of the things he changed was similar to what Tom was mentioning. We no longer waited for somebody to say, hey, I'd like to work for you. He said, you're going to tell us what your availability is, and we're going to plug you in where we need you. And the per diem programs over time have been, I'll send you my availability and plug me in if you can. If you can't, that's fine. But Chief Lamoria really engaged the per diem program and said, we're going to tell you when we need you to work. And it pushed some people away because they didn't want that much structure, but the ones who really have been here a long time really found it a lot easier to be able to plan their lives around a dedicated schedule. So as I was saying, the additional 8 employees for that 15 mark is made up by per diems when we can do that. We try not to operate any less than 12. When we hit the 12 mark, we usually will put a call out to our call company members that are in town and see if they want to cover some shifts at the station and do some of that. But a lot of them have other roles and other jobs, and they can't, Monday through Friday, it's not easy for them to take some of those shifts, but we do have some of those backup plans in place as well. As you see on the slide right here, this is just a visual for just to let you know, this is the kind of the standard that we're using to determine what that number, that 15 per day is. This is the national standard for what you need to operate at a major fire incident. 15 firefighters to arrive at a full alarm assignment within 9 minutes, 90% of the time. I'm proud to say that we do really well with our neighborhood fire stations. I think that helps a lot, but even without those, we are hitting our benchmarks for our response times. And that's really what, we took. There was a lot of emphasis on call volume, and that's important. That's an important metric to measure, but also the response times and being able to get there in the right amount of time was something that we really been focusing on, trying to make sure as we look at our staffing plan, as we look at our stations, as we look at our fleet.
With any of these, are you able to collaborate with the police department? Like, can the police department operate is the aerial device a drone, or is that?
No, that's a ladder truck.
The ladder. Okay, so they wouldn't do that. Is there anything that, if you have somebody else that's, in the station that they could help out if you're shorthanded, or we're not really there?
I don't think we're really there. And I will say that when the rubber hits the road and a fire comes in, we don't really have a hard time meeting this metric.
Okay.
Currently, I think that we're at risk as we move forward. The more the volume is, that it might become problematic. But to answer your question, I don't think the police would be able to do a lot of these functions or be willing to do those functions. There is a lot of training. There's a lot of credentialing that takes place nowadays. And it's one of the reasons why the call company is becoming less and less available, because we require a lot from them to be able to come and show up and drive a truck. And, you're talking $1 million pieces of equipment here that really need to have a qualified operator on them to do that.
Sure.
I will say that the police department is a wonderful partner. We had a fire last week over on Minuteman Drive, and the teams just worked so closely together on making sure that was resolved in a positive manner. So just real quick, the incident commander, that's the person, our captain that we have on duty, our shift commander. You see him in the red Tahoe that drives around all day. That's his job. His job is to show up at the scene, kind of direct the scene, make sure people are doing what they're supposed to do, keep control of safety and things like that. You need a pump operator for every truck that's got to pump water. So that there's one person out of that you need to have in that part of the equation. Firefighters obviously are important for the roles they need to be in. On attack lines, that you have to have backup lines, and all these things are really important. It is a standard, but in the unfortunate event that something bad happens, this is the standard we're going to be held to. The town of Scarborough will be held and say, why do you not meet this standard? And one of the things I learned from my predecessor was there was a receipt of a grant back in 2012 or 2013, maybe, to get to a point where we can meet this standard. So as part of that grant, we said, we are going to commit to doing this. So I think it's really important that we continue making sure that we can do this by this standard.
I imagine folks like homeowners insurance premiums and whatnot might be geared a little bit towards whether we meet these standards.
So you're probably talking about ISO, the ISO
Yeah.
rating and things like that. Absolutely, there are some things in play that definitely are calculated when an insurance company evaluates a home and decides what their rates are. I will say that ISO has become less and less available as a metric that people are using. The individual homeowner is not saving as much as they used to when ISO was out there. So I don't put a lot of stake in that. We certainly recognize it, but I don't put a lot of stake in the ISO rating itself. Personally. Some of the challenges we're facing that I wanted to share with you, the significant increase in call volume, and you'll see a slide coming up shortly, but the continuation of residential and commercial development. I mean, there's no hiding it. The town of Scarborough is growing. It certainly has a lot of things going on. There's a lot of commercial property coming in, and all that increases our volume. I will say, and I think I've told other counselors this, that my concern has not been so much the fire volume as it's been the EMS volume that continues to creep up. Our fire volume seems to be creeping at a rate that is manageable, but the EMS volume, which certainly goes back to when we have 3 of our ambulances out, that takes away some of our fire response. So that's the piece that we're really trying to focus on, how we can manage that. There's definitely a decline in a qualified and interested workforce. To Tom's comments earlier, in the initial stages of the per diem program, we were hiring full-time firefighters out of, traditionally it was Portland, Westbrook, South Portland, some of the bigger organizations. These guys, these crews were coming in trained, ready to go. There was very little work that we had to do to get them up to speed. That's not the case anymore. We're seeing lower application amounts for people that are coming in, and those that are putting in applications are qualified, but they're really at the minimum level that do require a little bit of work to get them up to speed. And that's both on the per diem and full-time side. We've seen a dramatic decrease in full-time applications. I was very lucky in the first round that I hired when I became chief. We had 17 or 18 applications, and that's the most we've seen in a long time. I remember sitting in a cafeteria with 200 people for my first fire job, trying to take a test to become a firefighter. So.
And you're fully staffed now?
We are full. We have one vacancy right now from a retirement that will be filled. We're going to fill at the same time we fill the 4 new positions in January. So we're going through that process now. The call company side of things, definitely fewer citizens willing or able to join call company. We're not seeing a trend where the folks that are moving or living in Scarborough are interested in volunteering. And realistically, with the volumes that we're looking at for the different stations, and it's not a volunteer or a call company job anymore. There's a lot to ask of these folks that are volunteering their time. And certainly there's still some out there, but I think that with families trying to work 2 jobs, be at home with their kids and balance that work-life balance, it's become much more difficult to recruit call company people.
So those are a lot of challenges. What's the most significant one? I mean, what's the biggest thing that you consider the most challenging?
I think the next one I was going to speak to, that our need and our ability to transition positions historically filled by per diems to full-time. I think the reliability of the per diem program has really worked its way out. It's something that was put in place. I think my next slide speaks to that, Liam, if you don't mind changing the next slide. Sorry.
But it was not a planted question there, was it?
No. Oh, that's
About the per diem, do you prevent your employees from serving in other towns?
we don't.
Do other towns prevent their employees from serving in other towns?
There may be some departments out there. I don't know the definite answer to that. I do know that it occurred during COVID. There were departments out there that says you can't go work in Scarborough on your day off because, as you know, we were all facing, putting people out for 10 days and they get an exposure here. They didn't want to have those exposures somewhere else and affect their full-time employment. So some chiefs came out and said, and not even sure that it was, they were able to do that, but their people followed that. And but overall, during the pandemic as well, some of these people recognize that, hey, I don't want to potentially take COVID home 3 times a week if I can do it just twice a week. So,
And before we stray away from the NFPA standards, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Because I know that's a conversation we've had in the past. Is there a standard in regards to ambulances support for population? I mean, I hear 3 and I'm like, there's 3 ambulances for a town that's 23,000 people? That seems insane to me.
insane as in not
Not enough
Not enough?
at all. And I mean, how many fire departments do we have? So where are they? Are both of them here?
We have 1 ambulance at the public safety building, 1 at Dunston, and the second ambulance, which is a spare, and it's cross-staffed by the Engine 7 crew out of Oak Hill, or out of the public safety building, is also up here.
Yeah.
So we have 2 ambulances out of here, 1 that's not regularly staffed. So there's 2, 1 on either side of the marsh, and that was strategic to make sure that
But there's
Except
no
for that's correct.
standards about
how many.
population and what your obligation is for support.
One of the advantages we have, Counselor, is that we're so close to the hospital. We are fortunate that our ambulance transport times and things like that are fairly quick,
but-
and we can turn around.
We're surrounded by medical facilities and
Yep.
that's all you're doing all day. And what I think about is the fact that, Intermed's coming down here now too. And so. I'll say the-
That's a great point, but I do think, getting that 3rd ambulance in would probably, we don't have that 3rd ambulance absolutely in place yet. I mean, it is staffed, it's crossed. When we put that 3rd ambulance in play, there's an engine company that's now empty. So Engine 7 out of the busiest station in town can be unstaffed at that point, if we get to that point. But we take the calls that are there at the time. We're not going to wait to see if a call comes in for Engine 7 when there's an ambulance call that could be handled by the crew. So we take the call that's in front of us. We are blessed with immense support from our mutual aid departments. There was a day last week, I think, that we had South Portland in here like back to back 3 times because everybody around us was busy as well. And we were all just kind of shuffling, and we share our resources. That's the way we do it. So. And to your point, Counselor Shoup, the specific increased demands right now is our EMS calls. It's clear by our data and our statistics that the EMS calls are climbing much more steadily than the fire side. And that is, I think, partially due to the amount of medical facilities we have. And the population in Scarborough traditionally is a little bit of an older population. We do have an elderly population here that requires those services and calls on them quite significantly.
Can you elaborate on the mutual aid a little bit? So you get a call and your guy's gonna go help somebody. You at that time, or dispatch at that time, calls another community to come cover or staff your station? Is that?
You want to answer that? Well,
Certainly. So on medical mutual aid, it's explanation of mutual aid, and we're supposed to be able to provide the same amount of coverage that they can offer us. If our resources get too saturated, both fire and EMS, then we might call either the call company or another mutual aid agency to come in and staff one of our stations, whether it be an engine company or another ambulance. But again, every community around us is experiencing very similar response issues that we are, and they are also going to be requiring some station coverage of some sort. So we really rely on the geographical fences, if you will, to provide for call. So the idea of South Portland coming in the other day, they may have had 2 or 3 calls that they responded into the town of Scarborough, but that same time or within that same day, we reciprocated maybe 2 calls to them. So that's kind of how the mutual aid works. There may be situations on a quarterly basis where we require more mutual aid coming into the town of Scarborough that South Portland requires us of going into them. So
it all comes out in the wash, but for the medical side of things, Counselor, it's usually when the call comes in, we're overwhelmed. They're not coming to cover the station. They're going directly to a call. They're going directly to a call and we have those agreements with all the towns that touch us. and they all provide paramedic level service. So it's the same, it's the same level of service, which is important to us.
I will say, we don't necessarily have a scorecard. We're not counting how many times they come to us and vice versa. It really, I think we all equally benefit from just kind of the insurance that provides, if you will, and the comfort. We did have one unique experience with the North Scarborough station in Gorham, where frankly, over a series of years, after multiple conversations, there was pretty pronounced imbalance where we were providing staff and they were not reciprocating, and it got out of balance, and we've corrected that. But that's a really rare occurrence. More times than not, it's just again, you don't keep track. You just it all works out in the end.
When the bell rings, somebody's always going to be there. And one of the things, just for when we don't send an ambulance, somebody from Scarborough Fire Department is showing up, whether it's the neighborhood engine, one of the crews from the neighborhood. There's always a presence. So we're never just expecting the EMS unit from out of town to handle it. We make sure they're done, and we all work through it together. It's definitely a really great system.
And as Tom mentioned, I think the mutual aid is probably not the most prevalent thing, but the overlapping calls is really what is a stressor to us as well. We could have several days where we'll have ambulance 1 out at the same time ambulance 2 is, and then ambulance 3 that has to take a call. And again, that takes 6 people right out of the gate to provide any other service that's either requested, whether it is a mutual aid call or if it's something within our town. But those overlapping calls are really strained.
Go ahead, Councilor.
No.
Just continuing with just a few other the challenges, the workforce challenges at some of the medical facilities, and we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about a proposal that Deputy Chief DuRoss and I are working with the town staff to try and come to fruition. But the medical facilities are also facing staffing shortages. They're having a hard time getting qualified staff, having staff present or available. And it unfortunately has kind of expanded to impact the EMS services in every town. It's not just us, it's everywhere around us is experiencing an increased call volume because, the nursing home doesn't staff with an RN overnight. So everything that needs a medical evaluation or something, they're calling in the paramedics to either come check it out or transport them to the hospital to get a better diagnosis from a clinician at a hospital.
I hear you say that, a medical facility doesn't have proper medical care overnight. There's no guidelines requiring them to have those type of people on site 24/7.
Just to be clear, I said they don't have staffing. I don't want to say they don't have qualified. I don't want to be,
Well, I'm wondering if you're performing services and they're in violation of their licensing agreement, as a medical facility, if they're short-staffed, are we literally filling the blank of them not meeting their requirement as a state licensed facility? And that's just a comment and a question that I'm
it's a
just.
two-part answer, I think.
Yeah.
They are definitely, I think they're meeting their requirements because they are licensed by the state. They have certain things they are scrutinized way more than most places. So I think they're meeting, but they're just like us. We're at our minimum staffing. We're at where, we are just making it happen. And they do, but the second part of that answer is yes, they do rely on us to help them with some of those things, whether it's lift assist, whether it's coming and doing evaluation or transporting a patient to the hospital for further evaluation that's either deteriorating or having a condition.
And do recall, transport does produce some level of revenue to offset our effort and our expense.
If we transport them, usually from most of the facilities here in the town of Scarborough, we get paid. And the average bill for an ambulance run, we ran it the other day, was like $905 was the average revenue that we would gain from a transport. If we don't transport, Medicare and most of the third-party insurance companies don't allow us to bill because we showed up. We didn't really do anything other than check them out and leave. So it's a transport benefit only is when we show up.
I'm looking through your slideshow real quick and I didn't see it. I don't think. I'm curious as to the percentage of EMS calls you're getting specifically to medical facilities and assisted living facilities as opposed to residents. I think it's concerning to me at this point that it may sound like we are kind of servicing the commercial part of this town, maybe more than we are the residents.
We have that data available. I was a little reluctant to share it
Numbers.
without you guys having, I'll certainly be willing to share it either during or after this, but there is definitely we use pivot tables too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is a chronic issue. It's not unique to Scarborough.
Yeah.
My mom was in a facility, similar to Piper Shores. We got 3 levels of care, or the specialized care unit in the past would have had nurses and doctors as staff, but they really, really struggle with doing that. So, I don't know what the solution is, but it's a chronic issue, I think, in terms of supply of people with those kinds of skills. Just don't have enough people.
Yeah. There's definitely an impact from the commercial facilities or the medical facilities to the organization when it's not a transport. I feel like it's kind of a wash. If we do transport a patient out of facility, regardless what the volume is, we're getting a fee for service. They're requesting a service, we're providing it, they're paying us for it. So that I don't see that that's a huge impact, other than the volume with the growth, the volume continues to go up. But it's and it's something that we're going to get to shortly. We would like to propose to probably the entire council. I'm sure that's when we get to a point to change the fee structure a little bit to see.
So the long-term care facility reimburses us for those trips, right? I mean,
The patient's insurance will do that.
or not, they get the bill, so.
Good. Yeah. We talked about mutual aid already, so I think we can skip that a little bit. Next slide. This was the slide I mentioned just before you. This came out of Chief Thurlow's 2018-19 staffing plan, and this was just a projection, going back 30 years to 1993, where we were doing 1,738 calls. And as of 2023, as I said, Chief Thurlow estimated 5,130, and we were at 5,179. He had a pretty good handle on trends and
So I'm guessing there's a correlation here, a pretty direct correlation between population growth and this, right? So
Absolutely.
what the line
the one thing that we did find out when we were cutting some of this data out, some of the other data in the staffing plan in 2018 didn't come to the projections that they made. They were saying in 2028 we would be in the 23,000 population range, and we are there already, I'm sure, if not more. So some of those correlations didn't actually come to fruition. So, but as you see in 2028, we're looking at I think 6,301 is low. I think by the time we get to 2028, we're going to be closer to 7,000. By just the trends that we're seeing. And just a quick breakdown of the last 3 years that I've been chief. In 2021, 4,300 calls. Of that, 2,900 were EMS. Fiscal year 22, 4,900 calls, with 3,500 of those being EMS. And this past year was 5,130, and 3,300 of those being EMS calls. So it's clear our mission. We're an ambulance service that really gets interrupted once in a while by fire every now and again. So.
What percentage of calls does that roughly work out to?
4 to 5, yeah. And just looking at the increases over the years, in 2021, our call volume went up like 2%. In 2022, that was the biggest jump, and that was shortly as we were coming out of COVID, was 12.8%. We went up pretty significantly. And then in 2023, last year, we were up 5.32%. And in the chief's estimates, as you can see, if you can't see it in the slide, he based that at about 4%. Annually, which was his average that he used. He was pretty darn close.
So do you also think there's probably a correlation between those call services and an aging demographic? Right?
Yes.
Maine is
Certainly.
one of the oldest states in the country, in spite of the influx of a lot of folks moving here. It's still pretty old.
Yeah, I would
It is the oldest.
I would venture to guess that our average age of patients that we have is in the 50s to 60-year-old range. We're not seeing it. We don't see a lot of kids. We don't see a lot of younger, other than car accidents here and there, some of the other stuff, the risky activities that people do. Next slide, ma'am, please. Then this, I do want to just make a comment. I noticed a typo as we were heading over here. The total call members in 2022 should match the first page, which was 34. And unfortunately, I must have hit 54. So I apologize for that. It's actually 34 call members is what we have currently. So I apologize for that typo. But as you can see from 1980, that chart that Chief Thurlow helped us build and we use regularly every year when we do our annual numbers, there's a significant increase in calls and a completely just a drop in the call company members available to help answer those calls.
You explain per diem to me.
Okay.
What's a call member?
A call member is a resident in the community that signs up. It used to be a volunteer. So it used to be a volunteer firefighter at the time. I don't know the exact year. I probably should know that, but I believe it was in the late 80s that they started paying a stipend to the call company members and to show up, to cover maybe gas or whatever it was. It was a small stipend. Now they make a significant wage when they come out for a call. They're paid when they come out, and they're only paid for the hours they're with us. They're highly trained. They're trained just like the full timers. They have EMS licenses that can help out, but they have a full-time job there. I mean, we have attorneys, we have car dealers, we have, all kinds of people on that show up and still help us provide service.
Now, do they typically only work when incidents come up, or?
When they wear a pager and the call goes out for their district or their area, and they come out and they show up, they can drive trucks, they can do firefighting, they can do all the things that any other firefighter here can do.
Okay.
But we are down to, there was Chief Thurlow used to tell the story that back in the day, somebody traditionally had to pass away before an opening on a department in a station was available. And now we can't do well to get people to recruit and join. So.
And that's not unique to Scarborough. That's a nationwide, worldwide.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Again, when you're talking about a department that provides a level of service we do, you gotta just, in reality, that to put that on volunteers or even call company members that it's hard to, they certainly they'll always be a part of this organization. They're an important part of it, but I just don't think that it's something that we can actively rely on as a staffing plan.
Right.
It's too unpredictable.
Are they associated with the neighborhood fire stations, or they are? Okay.
So they are all assigned to a neighborhood fire station. Again, back and Deputy Chief Lemoria and Chief Thurlow, they combined the call companies into one. So if you're in Pine Point, if there's a fire in Engine 5's district, you could still go to that. There used to be very strict lines about, some people didn't cross, they would go if they were called, but you didn't go to an Engine 5 fire until your station was called to go to it up in North Scarborough. Several years back, they kind of closed that gap again. With the amount of people we had, it just didn't make sense for us to, there's, as a matter of fact, today, there's 2 members at Black Point Station that are considered call company members. North Scarborough has 1, and he's 82 years old. So a wonderful man. He shows up at 2 a.m. and he can drive the truck better than anybody else and pump the truck. And he received a 65-year award this year for his service to the community. So we are struggling. Engine 4 down in Pine Point has a very robust call company. Engine 3 in Pleasant Hill also has a very robust call company that's still, and they're still bringing people on. So we're in good shape in those 2 stations. The others, not so much.
So you have folks that stay overnight in those stations like Engine 4? People.
Engine 4 is currently not staffed. However, we do have 2 second-year students. I'm sorry. Is there 2 second-year students?
Currently, there are 2, Chief. Yes, sir.
2 second-year live-in students from SMCC that live down there. But we have not restaffed that station since we shuttered it, or we stopped staffing it back in.
Are staffed at Dunstan and Pleasant Hill. Is that right?
Pleasant Hill is not staffed either. So the stations that are staffed currently are Public Safety Building, Dunstan, North Scarborough, and Black Point.
Okay.
North Scarborough was one of the ones we've all been concerned about because there's no pressurized water out there. So there's no fire hydrants, and we really need to have a jump on. We need to have people out there in case something does happen because it could go south quick.
You have a pumper truck out there?
Yep, it's a pumper. I'm reluctant to call it a tanker, but it can operate. It's got 1,000 gallons of water and a lot of hose on it, and it can do. And then we also have Gorham's engine is still in the station. It's just not staffed. They don't staff it anymore. And the one call company member, Clay Skillen, can also operate that truck. So if there's a need, he can jump in that truck, and Gorham allows us to use that if we need it.
Chief, just one other footnote on the decline in call staffing. Not only has our perception of kind of home life changed, maybe the ability to volunteer in this capacity, but the training standards have appropriately ramped up a great deal since 1980. So the hours required to stay compliant to be an interior certified firefighter, as the chief mentioned, is essentially identical to our full-time staff. So for people to not only want to volunteer and show up to those fires, but put in the requisite training to be able to do so has changed and evolved a great deal over the last 30 years.
So has that helped to offset a little bit of the staffing challenges? That you have people that are better trained or maybe know how to do more things than they did before? Is that a safe statement or not?
Well, certainly the more qualified or more qualifications, certifications they have, the more valuable they are to the organization, whether they can drive a truck. go interior. I'm very proud of the, one of the stances Scarborough took many years before I even got here is there's room for everybody. If you can't go inside a burning building, but you can help change an air bottle out in the front lawn, we'll bring you on as a member and use you for whatever you can bring to the table. We don't necessarily just require fully certified firefighter EMS providers. So some of those numbers in there are people who are support staff and certainly come out and help us, which is definitely something that is, and frees up the fully certified people to do the things they need to do on the inside. So that's something that I'm.
At the end of the day, it's all about numbers. I mean, it's certainly qualifications, but the emergencies happen at the most inconvenient times, I assure you. So to be ready and able whenever, in the middle of the night, I'm sure it happens most often when it's least convenient. So numbers really matter.
Yes. Any questions on that other than that was just more of a visual just to show you the decline that's occurring and to talk about our per diem program, it started over 30 years ago. Scarborough was one of the first organizations. I think it was the first. I'd be reluctant to confirm it, but it was the first organizations that started a per diem program. We were the only game in town, and every per diem that worked here was from Portland, South Portland, Westbrook, full-time firefighters, highly qualified. And some of them are still with us today. We have people, again, as Tom said, over 20 years have been with us. And this program was a great, it was used as a buffer. I think the chiefs back then always knew that the town would grow and that there was going to be a need for additional full-time firefighters, but they used this for over 30 years as a buffer to full-time staffing costs.
As a quick aside, my first day here as Scarborough Town Manager, I bumped into one of my Rockland firefighters. He was doing his per diem shift. I had no idea. I said, what's going on here?
That's a great point too. Just we have per diems from all over the state, from up in the mid coast, out to the western mountains that drive here to work for the town of Scarborough.
Will they work like a couple 24-hour shifts or?
So traditional shit, like our full-time firefighters, they work 8 days a month, 8 24-hour shifts a month. So all those other days they're not working.
Okay.
They can either do something else and the same thing with all the other departments. The Portland's, I think Portland is the same schedule. Portland, South Portland, similar schedules. And so when they're off, they supplement their income by coming to work another shift.
Yeah, most firemen have 2 or 3 other jobs.
Yes. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Counselor, because one of the things that we're concerned about at this table is the mental health piece of this thing. It's been more and more prevalent. And to immerse yourself in this, I did it over my career. I worked several jobs, 100+ hours a week. All of us at this table who did that. And I don't think I'm any better for it, but certainly I don't want to see somebody else have to do that and work that hard to be able to do those things. And mental health has been a huge issue. And the stuff that we're seeing here, the stuff that they're seeing at their other job, it's just not great for them to have to be immersed in that without a break. So, anything to add to that? Yes. Okay. Again, it provided a cost-effective and reliable buffer. Over the years, many more departments around us have adopted per diem programs to buffer their need to go to full-time. And they took all our staff. So people are chasing money. Falmouth will pay $26 an hour, and everybody else has to go up a little bit more to try and compete with that. And the per diem program has become a shuffle. Everybody's following the money. They're going to where they're going to get paid the most, where they're going to work the least, and try and get some extra money on their paycheck. So that's really where it's become. And then, as we talked about earlier, the pandemic impact was significant. I think a lot of people realize that, why am I going to go do this 3 or 4 days a week when I only have to do it twice a week? People took other jobs. We have several people in our organization that work in the trades. They don't do anything on the outside. They want to, I don't want to do firefighting when I go off duty. I want to go be a plumber. I want to go be a carpenter. I want to, whatever that is. So, and that's much more, I think it's more cathartic for them as well to get away from this. So. And then the level of qualifications, the last few years, the per diem, the quality of the per diem, we have great per diem, great applicants that we hire, but they certainly are not at the level that we were when we first started this program, where the folks could simply walk in, put a pair of boots on and really go to work. There's a little bit more training and education time that's coming with it, a lot more. They're missing some certifications that we got to get them when they get here. But that's certainly been an issue with the per diem staff.
Do you pay for the training
We do. Anything that's required, we will pay for.
for both the per diem and the call staff? Okay.
If it's well, a lot of times the per diems will come with it because it's required at their department anyway. But if there's something that we specifically require, we will cover that cost. The workforce challenges, this is the biggest, to your question about the workforce challenges that have led to the inconsistent staffing from day to day. I struggle every day knowing that a station is empty or I have 2 or 3 less firefighters that day. I think all 4 of us at the table, when we go home at night and we're wondering, when the tone drops, is there going to be enough people to do what they need to do? Again, we're only able to maintain 7 people, which for a town this size is not a lot. If we can't fill those other 8 positions with per diem and nobody else takes the overtime to fill some of those stations, where we could be down to 7. And I think was last Christmas.
It was Christmas Eve.
Yeah, Christmas Eve, the year of the storm. And it hasn't happened since then because we put some things in place, but we had 1 truck staffed in this town on Christmas Eve during the storm when we were out without power. It was a very difficult, obviously a holiday time. We wanted to work the holiday. Per diems running around and full timers didn't want to take overtime. So we were down to our minimum for the first time ever at 7.
Do you inform mutual aid towns when you're in that position?
Yeah, we had both our ambulances filled and we had 1 fire truck filled. That's all we had for that day. It was a difficult time. Then we talked about the workforce chose not to have additional exposures, open per diem shifts. This is one of the things I think my budget demonstrated this, the open per diem shifts that resulted in increased additional overtime. The CBA allows for the firefighters after the per diems, we can't fill it with per diems, they get first refusal of voluntary overtime to fill those shifts to keep our station staffed. And for some reason over the last 1.5 years, they have taken that ability and used it significantly. I believe there was a significant overtime cost to that last year because of struggling with the per diems.
So let me ask you a question with staffing issues, I know most of your folks a lot of your folks are bargaining unit people. Do you follow the practice of, canvassing down and forcing up? I mean, do you get to a situation where you got to force people to come in?
Yeah.
So does that happen very often?
We've seen a little relief, but I will tell you during the pandemic, we actually went into some contingency staffing because we were forcing people so much. And then we got to a point where there wasn't anybody to force because there are certain hours, they can only be forced up to 60 hours for the whole, to work the entire week. And it became problematic.
Not popular.
Yeah. And then morale goes down when they can't go home. Morale gets affected. And we're very fortunate. I will say our bargaining unit is very collaborative and we came up with solutions together to try and buffer that and make that a little easier. We are fortunate to have a good bargaining unit. Next slide, probably a slide that everybody is a little bit curious about.
One thing before you move off that, I just want to make sure there's an appreciation that for us to increase full-time by essentially 1 person, really multiples of 4, it's really 4 people to be able to provide that extra body 24 hours a day. And that's a concept that shouldn't be that hard to understand, but every time I hear they want to increase staffing, I say, well, why is it 4? And then I stop and realize they've got a lot of hours in the day they need to cover.
And we do operate off 4 shifts. So again, this is that 1 person, it requires 4 FTEs to fill 1 spot in the department. Thank you for that, Tom. I will circle back after. I think I missed something on the fleet and I'll work with Deputy Tenney, but I want to talk about some revenues real quick. As the slide says, our revenues are collected predominantly from the following sources: our fire inspection and plans review activities. And I'm going to take this opportunity to be a little braggadocious. Deputy Chief Brennan has knocked inspections, customer service, revenues. I think I budgeted $180,000 last year for revenues, and we came in currently to date, we were at like $225,000 in revenue for fire inspection fees and the fees that we collect for his plans reviews and things like that. But we far exceeded, and the year before that, we were 55,000 over. So that just proves how busy his office is.
And will you review any site plan that comes before the planning board or? Okay.
No, we review, I sit in on pre-construction, pre-application meetings, any site plan reviews. I'll work with the team downstairs and sit in on those as well. So for us, we're looking at more access issues, fire lanes. Can we get to the building? So we kind of the way I explain it is I start at like 100,000 foot view where I'm just looking at, can we get to the building? Is it make a, and then it drills down to, is it going to need a fire alarm system or sprinkler system? So we kind of start at the big kind of overhang, and then it kind of drops down as we get closer to the project, going through the permitting phase.
So you determine whether it requires sprinklers or not.
There, we follow what the NFPA and what the state fire marshal has adopted. Our ordinances in Scarborough, we are allowed to go more strict or stringent than the state fire marshal's office. NFPA, we can't go less. So the state will require certain things through what they've adopted at the state level. Our ordinances locally, historically, have always been a lot more strict. So for instance, in the area of sprinkler systems, you have sprinkler heads here. We also in Scarborough require sprinkler heads above the ceiling as well, not just below. So we have systems in place that have been in place for years, far before when I came on, that Scarborough has enjoyed a very robust and really a very hard line on sprinklers and fire alarm systems and fire lane access. And that's stuff that we just carry through. I can't I have to have something to base it on. So if someone questions me on something, I need to be able to provide them either code language or town ordinance language to basically say, this is where my stance comes from. I'm not able to just go off and say, well, because this project's here, this is what we like. I have to be able to back that up.
And just as an aside, I went and did a walkthrough with John on Friday of Costco. And, some of the inspections that he's doing are not, walking through a business office and checking a few rooms. I mean, when I stepped in that building, I was just in awe at the square footage, the amount of fire protection systems in there. We're talking the entire sprinkler system. This one has a diesel fire pump in it to be able to boost pressure. I mean, his inspections are not as easy as they sound when he goes out and does these. And that's why the part-time help, we did ask for the full-time position last year. And I know that it was cut out of the budget, but John Hedrick is able to pick up some of that smaller stuff to let John do the big stuff and approve the plans and do the big items. So it's not as easy as it was probably doing some of the smaller buildings.
Yeah, I think you take a project like the Costco, and I know that's obviously on the grand scheme, a large scale thing, but even an IDEX and really anything in that area, the innovation district. If you were to put in the hours or accumulate the hours of time from, like you had mentioned, starting at the site plan and then adding planning board notes, then going through the permitting process and the pre-apps and pre-cons, then just the on-site stuff, because it's not, we don't arrive and just do a test at the end. There's a lot of appointments that have to happen as the project is going on. And really as the project grows, or the size of the project really dictates how much involvement I have to have. So a situation like Costco, this week I've been there 3 different times for 3 different types of inspections because there's so many different systems in there. So the hours, both of review in the office of plans and site plans and permitting, and then the actual on-site witnessing of testing, will require them to run all their systems first, and then they'll schedule a test with us. I had a facility beginning of this week that we arrived, we performed a test, it didn't pass, you need to reschedule, and we clear and go to the next inspection. So we really hold their feet to that we are too, our schedules are far too busy and it's not just me, certainly the codes team downstairs, we operate hand in hand, that if you're not ready when we arrive, then you need to rework your system, and we encourage it. And through these meetings, and the one benefit I love about what we do is through the pre-con and pre-app, we are very upfront with the teams that are developing, and that these are the things you need to have in a row before you schedule an appointment. And if we get there and you're not ready, you're going to have to reschedule, and you're going to kind of fall into where there's an availability. One of the things that we've been dealing with recently is with some of these major projects is they're starting to get out in front of their work a little bit. And I've started addressing it in our meetings, and I did one today during our pre-construction meeting where they're actually advertising grand openings far before they should be. And what it's doing is then it turns to stress on the town and on the codes team in my office that, well, we have this opening set for this day. What do you mean we're running behind? And they're trying to almost put it towards us on that we need to meet these deadlines because we've advertised, we have people coming in. And so we've really kind of put our foot down and said, listen, if you put that stress on yourself, it's not going to come back on the town. We're still going to do projects. It's not fair to everyone else that has a project. So for every time we're at an appointment, usually 2 or 3 are waiting, or 2 or 3 permits have just come in. So really it's the time to sit down and really document, okay, I have time to do the plans review during this period, site visits during this period, and really kind of build your schedule out. So having the part-time person this year has been a huge benefit, because there's also the person that wants to move into just a small area that's just going to do an office space. It's a certificate of occupancy application, but to set the appointment up, perform the inspection, get the paperwork done in the computer system and send it to them, that's still an hour. Well, if I didn't have the part-time person, that's an hour now that I'm pulled away from Costco or one of our other projects that's in the pipeline, that I have to do this, a smaller level project.
Do you think our fees are sufficient for the time to cover the time? and
So we
effort that's
just,
required?
we increased the fees, in the last,
This year.
within this year for, we did not increase the, renovation of buildings. So if you buy a building, you do some interior renovation, cost of construction, we kept those fees, where they were. What we increased is, my review fee for new buildings. So the
Square
per
footage.
square foot fee, we were at, 20%, and I think we went to 40.
We matched with the codes office.
Yes.
They were at 40% and we went to 40 cents. So we went to 40 cents.
40 cents a square foot.
Do you have deadlines that you have to meet as an inspector? I know planning board has site plan review process. Are there deadlines? Because I hear everything you're saying. And we have residents who are saying, let's slow down the pace of growth. And you guys are staffing more people and increasing your input, your output. And I personally don't like hearing that. I want it all to slow down. I don't want you working so hard. I would like it to go slower and slow down the pace so we could maybe keep up with the pace. We're talking about how we can't keep up with the pace, and that's part of the reason I ran, because we're not keeping up. And you guys are staffing yourself to continue that pace. And that is just the feedback I will give with all that.
I mean, the deadlines we have is more of a customer service. We're always asked, what's your turnaround time on a permit if we submit today? We had a meeting with someone that's looking to go into the Christmas tree shop. So it was a meeting with some people out of state that if we put the permit in today, what's the turnaround time? And so we're always between the codes team and in my office, 2 to 3 weeks usually is what we tell them. If it requires state fire marshal review, that we're telling them it's 4 to 8 weeks, because they have quite the backlog up there. And so really imposed deadlines are really more on them on what they want to meet. We have a workflow that we work through, and when we're ready to issue the permit, we will. And like I said, if they still have items that need to be corrected, then we hold off on any issuance until those are done. We also deal with a lot of licensing things. So innkeeper's license and liquor license, all those also get reviewed by multiple town departments. So those come to us as well. So if we have outstanding fire violations from previous inspections that still haven't been corrected, I'll send my part-time fire inspector out to visit the location, see if it's fixed, and then work with them to get them into compliance before the license runs out or their renewal time's up. So that way they can continue to operate in whatever business field they're in.
Do we inspect every year for like innkeepers or bars and restaurants?
So our inspection schedule is based on the hazard. So depending on what your occupancy is, determines if you get inspected annually, every 2 years or every 3 years. We do get into where we have just resumed, of course, COVID with everything, it kind of interrupted a lot of our schedules. We just resumed this school year, getting into schools once a month to just do a walk through the common spaces. We don't interrupt the classes, but our firefighters will get into the common spaces, furnace rooms, checking the fire alarm panels, exit doors, signage, things like that that are non-disruptive to the students during the course of the school day, but ensuring their safety. But really it depends on what you have for an occupancy. And once a new business starts, we put them into one of the 3 categories, 1, 2, or 3 years. And then the other piece that will dictate some of ours is some licensure. So I know we talked about, like, for instance, a nursing home, they may be going through a licensing process with their board that requires fire inspection with a certain amount of time. If we're outside that window, we would then re-inspect them to assist them with their licensing process. So there's many factors that come in. It's a hard to answer because it's very dynamic structure of how we do our inspections.
But generally, it sounds like you get into most uses every 3 years.
I would say within 3 years, certainly I would avoid the COVID time of the last 3 years, that some stuff that we haven't been able to restart. One of the things that we're doing prior is we were just starting to get into some multifamily. So 3 units or greater, again, inspecting common spaces. That obviously with COVID, we stopped that process, and we have not had the time to begin or restart that. So that's something that probably in the future we really need to. My previous employment with the city of Portland, we were heavily involved with those after the Noy Street fire. And I think there's a lot of stuff out there that probably, I think once we start doing that, it's going to create a lot of work for correction on that, because I imagine we'll probably discover that there's a lot of areas that need some fine tuning in some of our existing multifamily buildings.
Just a hint for the future, we continue to talk about possible business licensing program, which will likely include an annual inspection component. There's an ongoing conversation in ordinance regarding short-term rentals, and there's a conversation whether annual or some sort of inspection schedules associated with that process as well. So
Like Old Orchard.
Yeah, I get
Every
inspected.
rental needs to be
for-
inspected every year.
Is it part of the fire department's responsibility, OB?
Yeah, I used to do
Uh,
it.
Is it?
I did it down there.
So codes does for the short-term rental,
Yeah.
but for a liquor license, for example, the fire department comes down and codes.
So both those programs, should we move forward, will likely have an inspection component. There'll be a staff cost and I think our fees ought to be commensurate with that level of effort.
Any other questions on inspections? I really wanted to highlight that because I think it's one of the most important divisions. I mean, obviously EMS and the response is important, but there's a lot of background work that's going on that John is busy every day. So I appreciate.
It's impressive.
It's an area that I'm not as comfortable as he is, and he can flip through that code book like nobody's business. So
I will say the one piece I'll add that we benefit from greatly in Scarborough is our members are very responsive. If they're out on a call, I can't be everywhere. So at 2 a.m, they might be on a medical call, but notice the building next door, maybe the rear porches they don't look like they're in great shape. Or something of the building they're in, they discover something in the unit they're in that appears to be unsafe. They'll send an email at 2, 3 in the morning. And I always interpret that as if I wake up in the morning and reboot the computer and I'm having emails from over, through the night, that tells me that they saw something that bothered them enough that they didn't say, oh, I'll talk to them in the morning. I'm emailing them before I forget. Maybe sometimes they attach photos. That allows me or John, my partner, in the fire prevention office to visit it that morning while the condition's still there. Reach out to the owner. Hey, can you meet us on site today? And that way it's allowing us to really get corrective measures on our more serious violations. Our firefighters aren't going to know the code book. I don't know the code book. I research it or have to use it every day. But certainly if they see, it's the whole adage, you just see something, say something. If they see something that doesn't look right to them, they may not know why. They just say, it just doesn't seem like this should be set up this way. They'll send me an email and we can get in within 24 hours, sometimes within 5 or 6 hours, while the condition's still there and get that correction before tragedy happens. And that's the one thing that I always tell them is you never want to be in a situation where your phone goes off, you see an address, you're off duty and you're like, I was in that building yesterday and I saw that. And so I really encourage them to reach out to us and to be very proactive in that. And so that's something I do want to give them props because they are definitely my eyes out there when I can't obviously be everywhere. So that's certainly a benefit to our organization, certainly the town in a whole.
The focus is on fixing the issue, right?
That was one of the big things. I'll be very honest, when the tragedy in Noy Street happened in Portland, a lot of eyes were looking at the Fire Prevention Bureau in their inspection. And although numbers are great, yeah, we do this many numbers of inspections. Really, what's more important to me and what should be more important to the town is the number of corrections. What's our correction factor? If you write 1,000 violations, how many of those are getting corrected in a timely manner? Some of them are going to take a little bit. If you tell somebody, hey, you don't have the adequate sprinkler coverage, that's going to take some time to get a plan developed, permitting, state approval. But if it's something that you've written up this year, you write it up again next year, well, then what do we, you have to get that correction. So that's really what our goal really needs to be, is that correction factor. And what's that percentage of correcting these violations?
Right.
thank you, John. Moving on to our largest revenue generator is EMS response and transport activities. As I put, just the fees are listed in our list of fees. Everybody can look at that. One of the things I want to talk about here in the next couple slides is a proposal that I'd like to, I suspect the venue is going to be the entire council when it comes time. But to add a new EMS fee in relation to lift assist. Now, lift assist is when a facility, a licensed medical facility calls the ambulance to come over and get a patient up off the floor and put them back in bed or put them in their chair, whatever that actually ends up being. And when we go there and do that, we show up and then we drive away and it's not a billable event. We're not allowed to bill the patient for that. Medicare, third-party insurances will not pay. And a lot of times the patient may or may not pay depending on where that is. Several towns, several of our colleagues have implemented, and 2 particular prominent communities, Bangor and Brunswick, have instituted a fee to the facility directly for these, to your point about supplementing their services that they're supposed to be offering. And it's something that we have examples, we have some draft things in place to look at how we can do that. And we would like to add a comparable fee for us coming over and providing those services if they're not able to do that. Most of those facilities are being reimbursed by a Medicare or a third-party insurer to take care of those folks. And there should be a corresponding in my opinion, there should be a corresponding fee if we're coming in and supplementing their staffing. Some of the facilities, I can't speak exactly for, other than one in Scarborough that have said it, their staff says it. They have policies that say their staff will not lift a patient. It's a workers' comp, whatever it is. They have policies for their staff that says, do not lift that patient up. Call the ambulance and they'll come over and do it.
The other part of that is that they may not have qualified staff to do an assessment on that person who's fallen on the ground as to whether or not they simply need to get back to bed or they need further treatment. So that's another part of what you might have to do.
Yeah, a lot of the patients that we see that have their own faculties are, I don't want to go to the hospital. I just want somebody to get me into my chair, get me back up to my bed. And they don't want, and if they have their decision-making capability, that, then we certainly won't take them against their will to the hospital to be evaluated. So it's definitely becoming the number of calls that we're doing for lift assist we do a lot of lift assists in town anyway. I am not proposing this to homeowners. I believe strongly that will be a service we will always provide to our taxpayers. No matter what they call us for, we will show up and we will do it. But as far as some of the commercial healthcare facilities, I think we might want to consider adding this as I don't necessarily want to call it a deterrent, but also just recouping the costs that we're putting out there. Deputy Chief Duras and I are, this past July 1, we started a period where CMS or Medicare is requiring us to do cost reporting for the entire fiscal year 24 budget year. So we will have to provide to them at the end of next year all our costs for providing EMS level services. And there's an algorithm and a whole thing that and luckily Deputy Duras did it in Biddeford. They were selected in year 1, right? Or year 1 or 2 to do it. So he has some experience. So I'm very happy for that. But we will have a really definitive product to share with you and saying, this is what it costs us to do EMS in this town. This is what every call costs, whether it's the 2 people on the ambulance, the fuel, the supplies that we have to buy on a regular basis. When this is done after June of next year, we have 3 or 6 months. Is it 3 or 6 months to get the data together and get it back to CMS? And we're certainly encouraged to do that because there's a 10% reduction in payment if we don't get it done for them. So it will be done.
And CMS stands for again?
Center for Medicare Services. So they're the ones that manage Medicare. They really set the fee schedules that most places follow and most insurance companies follow.
So with this new fee, you have some sample language. We don't, it looks like it's going to relate to licensed medical facilities.
Sure.
We don't license the facilities locally though, but if they're licensed through the state or something else. Okay.
Medical facilities, like nursing homes, senior living, all of those. Is it commercial?
Yeah, most of the nursing, and really this is designated towards skilled nursing or long-term care. This isn't a huge impact over at Maine Med campus. I mean, when we go there, 9 times out of 10, we're transporting a patient and one of the things I always tell Tom or whenever they're sick patients. When they call us from Maine Med, when the doctors are saying we can't do anything more, and there's doctors in that building and they call us to take them to the main facility, they're usually pretty sick.
What little we know of the rumored Intermed surgical facility, I would expect it would be fairly similar. They're doing day surgery, but some of it fairly detailed. And so I expect we'll have a similar experience whereby if we're called, someone probably needs a transport.
We talked to some colleagues from Portland who currently respond to that facility. Approximately 300 times a year is what they say Intermed in Portland. So there will be an impact.
I am a big supporter of the lift assist. I think that's really important. I feel like you guys are putting yourselves out there, opening the town to liability for worker comp claims, people getting hurt. What I'm curious about is what other services are you performing for them and then turning around and not billing for? Are there others besides lift assist that other towns have expanded their fees on? Are you showing up? Are you taking vitals? Where is the line? I mean, you guys we're paying to have you trained and full paramedics. And it does seem like, some of these, tax exempt places are getting the advantage of it. And I'm wondering if there are other fees similar to lift assist that you would be able to introduce as well, or if there are other services that you're performing, but then not able to bill because they don't end up taking transport.
Yeah, every patient that our folks visit have an assessment of some sort. And each level of care, whether you're an EMT, advanced EMT or a paramedic being the highest level of care, has that level of assessment done to each patient to include a set of vital signs and so on. So every patient gets the assessment, but not every patient is a billable patient if we, through the assessment, determine that there's no transport. The lift assists, for one, they will get an assessment as well. However, we're also using our providers to physically lift them up if we have tools available to us, i.e. sleds or a blanket of some sort, to actually lift the patient up. But every patient gets an assessment, which is that level of patient care.
And you can't bill for that. Even, it's odd to me. You're at a facility, the facility assesses you, and then you come and you reassess, and then you walk away.
That's very rare though, Counselor. I think,
And that's why I
the
don't.
lift
know.
assist is really the
Yeah.
prominent challenge. And I think all of our colleagues are facing that too. And like I said, the two communities that have already put this in place, have been successful with it for the most part. But, you know, if we go to a person who passes out and, you know, they're at the nursing home and there's a legitimate medical, and we go there once in a while, to check, do a quick evaluation, that really is really low impact to us. It's the lift assists have just really come to, we get 5 or 6 a day
What's the
sometimes.
fee? What are you
I'm
proposing?
thinking 500.
Wow. Even I think it's.
Yeah.
okay.
I
You
think
that's what?
I think that's big, but I mean,
Oh, you gotta drive an ambulance there with two
well,
guys.
so I mean, I look at ambulance bills all day, so I mean, perspective is most ambulance bills are under 2,000. So I mean, you're getting, when you think about that, that's an extra 500 that's a pretty big charge. I'm not against it, I'm surprised, I think it's.
I think it needs to be meaningful, that it's gonna be, that
Agreed.
it's gonna either have them change behavior.
Yep.
Or, hey, maybe I need that nurse.
Mhm.
Maybe I need to hire that nurse on the evening shift.
Yeah, I just want to correct it, with the exception of Maine Med, the majority of the facilities I think we're talking about are tax paying. I
Oh,
believe.
thank you, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think the majority are exempt. Just to be clear.
And it would be responsible of us too, to have that relationship with the facilities and to, when we do see an increase in lift assists or other types of calls that we would not normally have to respond to or not normally respond to or get called for, it would be on us to have those discussions with them and.
You've
develop those
begun that, right? I mean,
Yes.
you started to
Yeah.
raise this issue.
What are the fees in Brunswick and Bangor?
Bangor is 350 and Brunswick is 500.
I think the important point is that ambulance, if they're dispatched to that facility, as Chief Dura says, they're required to go perform that evaluation, determine if transport is needed. And then if it's not, then relocate the patient where they choose to go, that chair their bed. But that ambulance is no longer available for any other calls for service. That's the piece I think that really is a telling sign that now that you had mentioned that you find that 3 ambulances is shocking that we only have 3. Well, that's one that with minimum of 2 people that are no longer available for, regardless of the high level of call that may come in next, they are not available until their evaluation is complete and the patient is back to where they need to go. And that's required by Maine EMS rules and protocols. So we can't break that. The call could be across the street. They are not allowed to leave that call until the call's over. So that requires some time.
I think one of the pieces of information that will be very helpful and maybe might buffer that thought about 500 being a lot is when we do the cost reporting, where you see what it costs for us to do to actually take a call from start to finish. I think that's going to be great information. No services around us until this came out started doing that and really understood I think our budget has some clarity onto what that cost is, but this is really going to drill it down and we'll know exactly what that cost is. And if 500 is too much, maybe we back it away, but I think it's going to be pretty close. And then the other piece of the proposal that I'm going to bring forth, and partially I'll take a little bit of responsibility during my first couple years, or I'll be 2 years here in January. There's several things going on in the background when it came to revenues for EMS. There was an LD 1602 at the State House that was going through, that was the surprise billing, the surprise medical billing law that people were pushing, and that EMS somehow got sucked into that. And, even though we don't have any decision making whether or not we go or provide service, they considered us a surprise bill. If somebody you call our 911 and we come and get you, it's a surprise bill. So we had to negotiate we had a blue ribbon committee at the state level that negotiated with insurance companies, and they came up with a law that negotiated a cost for main insurance companies on what they would pay us. And they'll pay us 200% of Medicare for every call that we do, 200% of what our billing is for Medicare. So we weren't quite sure what that was going to do for revenue. So I wasn't quite ready to make any predictions higher or lower. And we didn't increase our levels at that time. So one of my proposals is going to be raise our current EMS fees 5%, which the law allows for this year. And I think that our current ordinance allows us to do that without action. We're allowed to go up based on the rates that Medicare raises. So I don't know I think you certainly should be aware of it, but I think it's time to go up that 5% this year, and it would be right in line with most of the other organizations around us.
That sounds about right. I think you like that.
Yeah.
It's similar to CPI and
Yeah.
ECI data indicates that range.
And just a couple other quick things on Scarborough billing. As you know, we have a third-party biller that does that work for us. It's a very complicated process, and I do know that we used to do it internally many years ago, but I think it was 12 or 13 years ago. We contracted with Comstar out of Rowley, Mass. They've been a great partner with us. They're readily available whenever we need to call them. They're very good at providing reports, and they work well with the finance department and everything like that. So we're happy with them. I provided you with the billing policy. If there's anything in there that you have any questions or you think should be changed, it's very generous towards the Scarborough resident. There are certain federal rules we have to follow, but there were some areas where we could allow some courtesies to Scarborough residents when it came to billings and write-offs and things like that. So if there's ever any questions about that specifically today, or I can answer them at any time. I provided that in the
I
past.
remember we met over the summer and it looked like there was an increase in uncollectibles. Have you seen that? Maybe it was due to the pandemic. Have you seen that come back to normal range or?
I was looking at just to date, just before we came over, and we billed out just since July 1, we billed out $385,000, and we've taken in 101. We've collected 101 just since July 1. So that's an estimate up to today. So I haven't seen an increase in uncollectibles. Julie and I go through a monthly report that kind of looks at what they provide us with hardship notifications or requests and things like that. And we're certainly kind and we do what we can, but we're also a business. We need to make sure that we're covering our costs and doing the things that we do. And we are really thorough on those reviews for those.
And there's a lot of valid reasons to waive this.
Sure. Right. Yes.
Yes, but not for car accidents. Despite all my attempts to try to get you guys to reduce those EMT bills, you will not.
No. And then our annual revenues, just, I think we've talked about this during budget season. They average about 1.8 million is what we actually bring in annually. And of that, for this particular year, I didn't increase the projections because we weren't sure of some of the variables. This LD 1602, a few of the other things we weren't quite sure of. So we left it at 1.2 million this year. And anything above and beyond that 1.2 million that goes back to the general fund is set aside for capital projects and capital improvements to the EMS side of the house to make sure that doesn't go towards staffing necessarily. I guess it could, but it goes towards buying the ambulances, buying the stretchers, cardiac monitors. All those things are being needed earlier because of the use. They're getting more and more use every day. So
We just purchased 3 new ambulances, was it, or 2?
we did. We got the first one. We did that one with ARPA money, and the second one is still in production for ARPA money. And then this past fiscal year, you approved the third of our ambulances to be approved through reserve funds, I believe. Yeah. So that's a good, we're gonna get a good jump on that, talking about the fleet. Deputy Chief Tenney and I met with the staff down at Public Works, Eddie and Dennis, the other day, and they gave us some advice, and they have some pretty significant concerns about the volume and the pressure that's going on some of our vehicles and replacement timelines and things like that. I think traditionally the ambulances have gone 8 years. there's no way ambulances are gonna last us 8 years anymore. We're gonna have to look at probably dropping that down to 5 years
Wow.
as we repair them, as we get them replaced. So we'll have a good starting point. Unfortunately, we're gonna need to replace
Time to
3.
go to another one.
Three and eventually I think we may need a 4th to have a spare, because that 3rd one is likely gonna be our next ask, is to staff that ambulance and get that on the road, because I think it's just at a point where we're gonna need it.
I assume we're buying these, not bonding.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, generally, we haven't been bonding.
And you said there's 3 ambulances, but 2 of them are staffed and they have like a 3rd that's.
Yeah, the 3rd one is usually will go into play when one of them goes to Public Works for service or anything like that. So that we always have 2 ambulances on the road. The vendor we have, or we're very lucky to have the vendor that we partnered up with, they have a significant fleet of spares as well that they can give us. It's a loaners, I should say. The one thing the last slide, I got questions and discussions for the last slide, but one of the things I neglected to mention was the fleet piece is really up in the air. We're really struggling. I think the fleet and the staffing plan, a written staffing plan for you, which will be ready for the next budget season. They're one and the same. We got to determine what the trucks have to be determined before we determine how many staff we're going to have. Do we have too many trucks? Do we have enough trucks? Do we have them in the right places? And that's all part of this. We have a retreat coming up next week that we do. This will be our 2nd annual one, where we are digging in on our fleet and our station plans for what we're going to do, because we really got to take a look at that and see whether our model is still valid. One of my goals, and I think all of our goals as the chiefs up here, is we're looking at reducing the amount of trucks that are responding, but the more people on the trucks that are responding. Right now, we show up with all the trucks from the town to a fire with maybe 1, maybe 2 people on it. We've transitioned to a point where we're showing up with a staff of 3 at minimum on every truck now when they show up at a fire. And that's why engine 4 and engine 3 aren't necessarily staffed. They have full, robust call companies that can take those trucks. So that's kind of where we're heading towards, is putting more people on individual trucks showing up, rather than having all kinds of trucks showing up, and a lot of them just parked along the street that aren't really necessarily needed. We needed the people more than the trucks. And last Thursday was a perfect example. On a Minuteman, we used 3 fire trucks and for that whole fire, and it was a large home. And we had people on those. We had 3 or 4 on engine 4, and the crews going to work together has made it so much more efficient. And the work that they're able to accomplish when they show up together, ready to go to work, has just made a total difference in our operation, and how we operate.
Makes a lot of sense.
So that part is still kind of in flux, and we'll certainly be keeping Tom in the loop, and there could be some decisions that need to be made. But it's an important piece. That the staffing plan is directly related to the trucks, I think, in my opinion, and how we do. You wanted to add anything about the fleet, or?
Certainly, I apologize, the apparatus replacement plan and the analysis is something that exceeds, I think the original format was approximately 80 years ago. So the community and the fire department's got a phenomenal tradition of very thoughtful, deliberate planning and assessment of the serviceable lifespan of the fleet and when we need to look at replacement. So there are not surprises, and there haven't been for several decades, which is a beautiful thing. An additional layer, a couple of additional layers that we're digging into now with our partners at the Public Works Department. The amount of use that the vehicles are getting now, as you saw the trends with the increased demands for call volume. The traditional service life of the vehicles is changing from what we forecasted over the past several decades. That's a new reality. It's something we're going to have to look at. What the fleet looks like physically, with the amount of construction that's going up in the community and the changing landscape, literally, buildings, the density of housing that's being built in terms of the numbers of buildings in a given space, are going to force us to take a pretty innovative look at the layout of the vehicles, because we're evolving to a point where we need things that have got shorter wheelbases, that are more maneuverable, that can get into some of the neighborhoods that are being built or updated. And as the chief mentioned, that has the fleet and staffing are linked. We're at a place now where we are creating more contiguous fire companies. So we've got a number of members that are assigned to a vehicle that are showing up together. In general, every additional person you put on a fire apparatus increases that unit's effectiveness at an incident by 25%. There's been a bunch of performance studies that have been done, and that data has all been vetted. That being said, our fleet design is empowered to change from a number of our heavy vehicles. The fire companies are set up for multi-purpose use. So we don't have a lot of people traditionally. So the vehicle has to be kind of a Swiss Army knife or a Gerber tool. It has to be able to do a lot of things. That generally drives the size. We're at a place now where we're gaining on the people end of things, and that's going to enable us to make a smaller, more maneuverable vehicle that doesn't have to have the workload of all the systems that kind of a all-in-one unit has. So these are things that we need to dig into and look at in terms of design and adjusting potentially the maintenance and the replacement program to meet the needs of the community, because the community is changing as well.
And that really mirrors the conversation that Ed gave, talking about plow trucks. They've reduced the size of their plow trucks because some of the neighborhoods, some of our fire trucks will really struggle to get in some of the newer neighborhoods.
I thought that's where you come in. So I'm on the planning board, you're giving all these waivers of, oh, we don't need that space. We don't need that space. And then I hear you saying to me, we need smaller equipment to get into spaces that you said you were okay getting into. So, because I thought you guys were part of the subdivision process where they have to meet a code. And then you have to say, we're waiving that, but, 'cause I mean, that's what we see on planning board.
Mhm.
And so I hear this and it's a little.
The neighborhoods do meet the code. They're going at the minimum. We could certainly, I guess, increase that. If we.
So is that the problem? Do you need smaller equipment because we are giving too many waivers? Because when I was on planning board, we were seeing waivers for, oh, well, the fire department requires 25 feet, but they're okay with 24. And now you're saying we need smaller trucks. Should we increase that? Should we stop giving those waivers, or is that really not an issue?
If I may, from the fleet end of things, it's as with every other industry, there's a lot of newer and additional technology that develops, which empowers a vehicle in our industry to actually become smaller. So without getting into a ton of trade jargon, a ladder truck, think of it as a large crane where we have to stabilize the vehicle. So there's telescoping outriggers. The industry is evolving so that there are different stabilization systems that take up a much smaller footprint. So while all due consideration is given in terms of the plan review, certainly, we're just looking to figure out the most effective, streamlined performance system that we can obtain that's going to work for the community. Figuring out cars that are, and this happens in the industry routinely, cars can be double parked. There can be snowbanks, right? There's contingencies that even the most forward-thinking planner or review committee just can't always program out, right? The human behavior part occasionally. We have to account for those on the fleet design end of things and just assume that everything that can possibly be in our way is going to be in our way, and we need to figure out a way to reduce or eliminate that obstacle operationally. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. We have almost 3 or 4 minutes left to do the second half of our agenda.
Okay.
This was wonderful, guys. I'm
Sorry.
really glad I got to experience it. Do you have anything else? Any closing remarks?
No.
Okay,
Anybody else have anything? Good to go.
great job. Thank you guys very much. We're in really good hands. And the fact that you're questioning the status quo and looking to the future, I think is incredibly important for our community. So
I would just add that navigating that, I appreciate you recognizing the status quo, navigating that for 4 essentially outside chiefs is not always easy. So I appreciate that you recognize that some of these changes might not come as to everybody as easy as they probably should.
yeah,
So thank
and
you.
it'll take some time too.
Thanks.
Next item for discussion is reviewing the source, how we're going to pay for the option agreement tournament. And this wasn't included in the packet, but we did get some suggestions or I guess possibilities maybe from Tom today. And Kate, I believe.
And Norm.
And Norm. So why don't you walk us through what, and if you have a recommendation, please,
Sure. Just, I'll try to make fairly short work of this. Just the quick background is the purchase option agreement. This is for the land, for this unified school. Does have an option fee associated. That fee, becomes effective starting December 1st of this year. So just fairly shortly. That fee is $25,000 a month. The way it works is that, it's all goes toward the purchase price at closing. In the event we don't close for whatever reason that might be, this option fee is paid to the seller and the seller keeps that. It's essentially a deposit, if you will, for lack of a better term. This sort of approach is fairly customary in commercial real estate transactions. So beyond that, the option agreement allows for closing well into the future. In fact, the total exposure here, should we take it to the possible end, would be about a $300,000 series of option payments if we play it out all the way to its end. What we're really concerning ourselves with is kind of the exposure in the current fiscal year. So from December 1st through the end of June 24. That exposure is 175,000. So I think for purposes of this discussion, that's really what we're looking at.
I don't have the materials that you're referring to.
I handed them out. I beg your pardon.
Yeah, thanks. I didn't get one. Thanks.
I'll take it back.
Thanks, thanks very much.
Yeah, and I beg your pardon. I think Councillor Clucci mentioned this perhaps at your council meeting last Wednesday. So I beg your pardon. I was able to coordinate with Norm and Kate just this week. So we've identified, I'll say 6 different options, and I can move through those fairly quickly. The first thing that we looked at was looking at monies within our operating budget. The town or the school provided for such payments in its operating budget, so we don't see that as a viable option. With respect to capital budgets, you may recall the council in 2 different times in FY22 and 23 provided monies to the school, so-called long-range planning monies. This is really monies to seed the initial advanced work with architectural and engineering and the like. Kate advises that those monies are either expended or fully encumbered at this point, so there's really no additional funds there. And then we looked at other options. We have the town's unassigned fund balance, current balance about $10 million, pending audit. We have a policy that guides that. Potentially use of that would impact bond ratings. Frankly, just as a footnote, I think these sorts of amounts will not likely have a tremendous effect, but I don't really like the optics of using fund balance, frankly. The school, for its purposes, has its own unassigned fund balance that has a current account balance of about just over 2.1 million. And Kate, I don't want to speak for you on these matters whatsoever. So let me run down through these, and then we can perhaps give Kate a chance to speak. The school also has a capital reserve fund. This is something the council's worked closely with the Board of Education and school staff to establish over time, and very pleased to report that Kate has recommended to the Board of Education, and they have directed some of their unassigned fund balance to replenish that fund that's been used almost since the first year was created, frankly. So I'm very pleased to know that we have that in place, and we're starting to fall into a regular cadence of relying on that. And lastly, we do have school impact fees that would be available. So we see those as the range of options, and perhaps I'll stop there and let Kate chime in on any one of those.
Hi, I'm of course using my voice always when I come to talk to you guys. So the school unassigned fund balance is the numbers you see here are based on our year-end FY23 report, which we just did with the board last week. Auditors will be in next week, and we'll have bottom line numbers, but we expect that that's our unassigned amount. And as you guys probably know, because you've heard this before, that those unassigned funds are typically used then in the ensuing fiscal year as non-tax revenue. So in FY24, we have $1.5 million of fund balance used to offset the cost of the school budget to the taxpayers general fund. And so that 2.1 million is basically what we're saying we have available now to build FY 25 and hopefully FY 26 as well. So when I was talking with Tom and Norm about this, I'm thinking, well, there really is a plan for that money. And the fact that it's unassigned is simply just the process at the end of FY 23. The School Capital Reserve Fund, as Tom said, I'm super excited about that. I have to say, John, that Freyla made a beautiful speech at the board meeting last week when she made the proposal to put the $800,000 in there, and she wore her yellow bus sweater because she said, these are the buses for John Clute.
I wish I would have seen that.
I think you can,
Thank you.
you can see the video. But there was a lot of discussion with that capital reserve fund about the conversations that we had between the board and the town council finance committee during the budget development process about making sure that we continue to fund that and continue to have that as an option rather than going out to bond, and particularly around vehicles, as Dawn was saying, and also around the high school turf and track complex. Because when we were trying to work on renovating that and have continued to do so over the past 2 years, one of the concerns and disappointments was that we hadn't been saving up for a known cost that was going to be coming in the future. So that's the kind of conversations we've been having about the capital reserve fund.
Then the final piece on the school impact fees, traditionally, we've used these fees to offset debt costs. We always have sufficient debt cost, more than fees would support. There have been a couple of off chances, 2 occasions where council authorized use of these funds for additional portables to meet some immediate needs. And then also, I believe some of those monies were also used to help fund some of these long-range planning efforts as well. But again, by and large, they are used to offset debt costs. There is an existing balance of 668,000. And I guess to cut right to the chase, of these options, we would recommend that the council authorize the use of these funds to cover the likely exposure in this current fiscal year of 175,000. And then that would leave us the requirement to figure out the rest of it in the FY 25 budget.
So with this one, I'm a little torn with that recommendation because it's an option fee that could convert to a capital improvement if at the end of it. So it could almost be like a loan, because it really, the bond would be a source of funds for this if the project comes to fruition, right? Or it could be, because that's.
So either you would be bonding those funds down the road and could replenish, or you could say, I need to take out a lesser bond because I've already
That's right.
prepaid.
I think the latter would make more sense.
Yeah,
Particularly
otherwise
since these
or
funds
we
are
could
typically
repay.
used to pay debt service costs.
No,
Does
it's
it make
fine.
sense
Yeah,
to borrow money only to repay money to pay the
back.
debt service?
Right.
It's-
Where I get hung up is if it doesn't convert. So if the project doesn't come to fruition, then you just spent school impact fees on an option that may turn into something or nothing.
Yeah, let's not do that.
But the capital reserve fund, which I love, and I hate to tap for it, you don't have some of those same constraints where you could actually.
So we did talk about that a little bit, John, and I think we are really considering both options, but I think if we started with the school impact fees with the conception that we were going to move forward, go to referendum and have that solution in terms of funding overall,
That's true.
that would be the desired outcome, right? And then if that does not come to fruition and we are basically out $175,000 in that area, we would have other ways, other mechanisms to replenish the school impact fees from the capital reserve, from the unassigned fund balance. I think that's kind of
Sure.
where we were
That's fair.
landing in terms of what made sense in the short term
You sold me.
versus the long term.
That's fine. I don't have an issue with it.
Because I make my hands go like this.
Yeah, that was it. No, it was a good answer.
My feeling is, why would we, have something hanging in the balance if we're just waiting, we're not sure what the outcome's gonna be? Would it make more sense to earmark these funds for something we know won't be depending upon a ballot variable on November 7th?
Earmark the school impact fees
Well,
or any fees.
I would just say anything. I mean, why would we take a chance on something we don't know what's gonna happen? You know, if there's a more direct way to use these funds, you know, without having to roll the dice to see if it happens or not.
I think the ask is on the assumption that we do need to start making those payments in December to be thoughtful and pre-planful of
Right.
where that money would come from.
I don't have authorization, so I would need council's authorization. We're starting with you to get your advice and input in terms of what to formally bring forward to the council.
Well, since we don't know the outcome, my position would be not to, you know, not to flip a coin on it.
Not
Well, we're
so I
not,
did
we're not making a
authorize
call now.
service.
Well,
But-
that's my bias, okay, I would, you know. And forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but didn't we have some sort of issue here with restating? Didn't we have a material weakness issue that we had to address with the audit in this area last time or not? Involving our, you know, school fund balances of some type. Wasn't that an issue for last year's audit? The last audit that we did?
Well, the material weakness was around the carrying of sick and vacation
Okay,
liabilities on the general fund where they don't belong according to accounting standards.
didn't have anything to do with this.
No, once we made those entries for the last audit, that's behind us.
Okay.
Material
Yeah,
weakness
that
is
actually ended up technically increasing our unassigned. fund
addressed.
balance.
Yes.
My bias is just to kind of not do anything terribly creative, and I would think, don't we have guidelines in terms of what our fund balances should be? And shouldn't that be driving a little bit? We have fiscal policies that tell us where to put stuff and what levels to have.
And that's exactly why we're not recommending that as the source. We're just trying to lay out what the possible options are.
So-
This is a financial obligation we have vis-a-vis the option agreement.
Right.
And I do not have authorization to spend money.
I
I need
understand
it.
that. I
And
understand,
the
but-
finance committee is not meeting next month. You can
Right.
Imagine we won't have a structure.
Yeah, and
And so I think this is very appropriate. I think it seems, at least to get our opinion as finance committee members, even if you don't agree with the process, I at least want to support what Kate is presenting tonight and using the school impact fees initially. Is that what you were saying tonight, correct?
Yeah, I think that what Tom's telling you is that there'll need to be a council action to
Yep.
authorize the spending of any of these funds
Right.
because they were outside of the budget process.
So what I'd like to ask, I'd like to see what this does, what we are recommending is going to do to our fund balances and how closely that improves or doesn't have any effect or takes us in another direction in terms of our fiscal policies for various fund balances. That would be my guiding light on this.
Our recommendation is to use school impact fees, which will have zero effect on fund balance.
Right.
And the total maximum exposure that we're seeking would be $175,000.
And is that what where is that stated in here?
It's in the
The final
recommendation portion at the
recommendation.
bottom.
Yeah, so Don, if we don't.
And by the way, I'm seeing this for the first time now. Okay, so the fact that I have to turn on a dime and give you a recommendation, I'm really not happy with this at all. Okay.
just to be clear, you're going to see it again. So this is,
Okay,
finance committee's charged with reviewing all appropriation requests. I thought it made sense for us to pick it up because
Fair enough.
there's going to be a gap.
fair enough.
It's not perfect. I actually appreciate what's in front of us. I will ask that if we can add it to the packet so that, the public has
Certainly.
ready
Yeah.
access to it as well.
But I'm not in a position to make a statement on this. I'm gonna have to just not vote on it because I don't know if enough about it. I'm not comfortable enough with the recommendation and the time that I've had to study this.
Sure.
It was just 10 minutes, so.
So that's fair. You'll see it probably two more times because an appropriation requires 2 votes at the council level. I've had more time to think about it, Don, to be honest. I'm comfortable with the recommendation. I think it's about all we can do. Ideally, this would have been in the budget.
Yeah. I understand.
It wasn't. It's a commitment we have to pay for, and this is a viable way to pay for it, I think. So I'd like to entertain a motion to recommend using school impact fees to cover the option payment for at least the fiscal year 24 portions.
Okay, so I'll make a motion to use the school impact fees towards our monthly option fee payment for 2024.
I'll second that.
And I know I can't abstain, so I'm not voting in favor of it. I have not had time to study it, so I'm voting no.
That is fine.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Seeing-
No, I mean, I will say, I know that this is new to me in front of me, but I trust you guys and I know that you've done your due diligence. And I know this has been on your mind, not just the last week, on how to proceed and how to cover these costs. And so I support this and I will present that with the town council with the support.
Thank you. All those in favor? And opposed? Motion passes 2-1.
I know Tom voted, but he doesn't get a vote. Okay, so.
I was not counting Tom's vote if he did.
I say.
I was looking at you and over here. I know we're running over and I do know there's a meeting coming in behind us. Don, you wanted to talk.
No,
about Steve.
we've run out of time and we've got a little more time to talk about it and socialize it ourselves. So I look forward to, we only have a public hearing on it on Wednesdays, so we've got
It's a
time.
first reading on Wednesday.
Is it?
Yeah, we had the public reading last week.
But it's not an action though, right? We're not voting on
It's
it?
first reading.
First reading,
There with the planned second reading. So there's a lot of time before anything's going to be passed.
right?
And I think there's a good opportunity to socialize any potential
Yeah,
amendments there.
there's just no time now, but thanks for the chance to do that and we'll look forward to talking between now and then. Okay, thanks.
Any members of the public want to comment on anything? Seeing nobody here, I do have a motion to adjourn. Second down, all those in favor,
Yes.
we are adjourned. Thank you guys very much.